Thank you for everybody coming and joining Summit today. And this is a real thrill. And to be here with you, Dario, and your team. And I, for one, we're excited to show really the world what this collaboration is and what it's all about. And I think it's symbolic that we're here in DC together at this time. But before we maybe dive in, I've got a lot. I hope we can cover a lot of ground today in this conversation. But before we dive into that, maybe a little bit of background for the uninitiated about Anthropic and who you are as a company and what that journey's been like and what your focus is.
Of course. Well, thank you for having me, Dave, and thank you, everyone. Maybe first a few seconds about me. I've worked in the AI field for the last 10 years. I've worked at most of the major companies that produce AI models today, including Google and OpenAI. And along with the people who eventually became the co-founders of Anthropic, who were my coworkers at the previous company, we developed a lot of the ideas behind the current generative AI boom as that continues to scale up and the models continue to become more powerful. So we founded Anthropic around the end of 2020, which makes us by far the youngest of the major companies who produce models in this space. And we basically had two theses. The first was the belief back in 2020, which still wasn't popular back then, that the key to getting great cognitive performance on these models across the wide range of economically valuable tasks that we see today was really buying a lot of chips, training them on a lot of data, really scaling up this seemingly simple process of predicting words from models, as remarkable as that is. I think the other two or three companies, have gone in similar directions. But I think something that's more unique to Anthropic is we also had this belief that we can do this responsibly, and we can make our models safe, secure, reliable, lower hallucination. So we focus very heavily on that, and we don't see that as being in conflict with having the best model. Very quickly on the first one, in terms of the goal to have the most powerful model, over the last 3 years we've had to build up the org from nothing, and last week we released Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which on many of the public benchmarks, and if you just go and look at social media what people think of it, I think it's fair to say, of course I'm biased because I'm the CEO, but I think it's fair to say that many consider this to be the best model available in the world, even though we're younger and very under-resourced compared to our competitors. We've managed to produce the most capable model, but we don't believe that we've sacrificed safety and security. And I'm sure we'll get into that later in the chat. But that's what Anthropic's about. That's what Anthropic tries to do.
That's great. Our teams have been working closely together. We were talking on the side. We pretty much talk every other day, or and sometimes several times a day. And the focus of our organization and my organization is really around helping public sector and giving them access to these sorts of technologies. We really believe that we've got to accelerate their access so they can adopt those. What is it about AWS and our cloud services that got you so excited and got your team excited?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll talk first in general and then about public sector. So I think in general, when we think about safety, security, and privacy, we think of that as a multi-layer thing, right? We're responsible for doing that in terms of the model layer. We're responsible for providing safeguards, for making sure that models don't make things up or emit private data or that they can't be compromised. But of course, none of that's any good if the cloud layer gets compromised. And so one of the reasons we're working so closely with AWS is just being known for protecting the privacy and security of data, being a brand that people can trust, so we can go to customers like yourself and say, we're able to provide safety, security, and privacy, not just at the levels we control, but we have a partner that provides them at the other levels. In terms of public sector, as I think this audience knows probably better than anyone, AWS serves the majority of public sector workloads, maybe the vast majority. And there are dedicated clouds, which we're going to talk about in a bit, for serving specialized types of government workloads that we've been worked very closely to put ourselves on. And so with AWS mainly serving, being the main server of the public sector, and Claude being by far the most popular model on AWS, we think we have a very exciting combination here.
How has GovCloud and our IC Marketplace, how have those mechanisms, how do you think they're going to simplify access for public sector customers?
Yeah. So first of all, just to, as of this week, we're making some Anthropic models available, 3 Sonnet and 3 Haiku, available on both GovCloud and Intelligence Community Marketplace, so classified clouds. Just as some context, we've been, as Anthropic, working with governments for a long time, including on national security issues. For example, we recently ran pre-deployment testing of Claude Sonnet 3.5, which we recently released with the UK and US AI safety institutes. So we see this kind of as, as an extension of that. We're making Claude available for applications like combating human trafficking, rooting out international corruption, identifying, covert influence campaigns, warnings of potential military activities. Just in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, I think being on ICMP really simplifies government procurement down to things as mundane as contracting rules make it difficult to have a service that you can auto-renew, right? These problems people face over and over again. IC Community Marketplace makes it easier because AWS has worked with this many times, and so we don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of this. And then philosophically, I think we ultimately believe, and this meeting is a part of that in all kinds of ways, AI needs to empower democracies. And allow them both to function better and to remain competitive on the world stage.
Absolutely, and I think these sorts of things are going to create transparency. They're going to create better mechanisms for communication, and really excited about the opportunity. So pulling out from the US a little bit, globally, what are you seeing from customers on some of the benefits of like Claude 3 family and Haiku and Opus? What are some of the things you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's some of the very similar use cases that we see in the U.S. Both on the consumer product and on on the API that we serve through AWS. So things like coding, financial analysis, legal, search and productivity, things like that across the board. And then if we think about the public sector equivalents of those. Things like contract analysis, budget analysis, writing reports, generating code, showing that code is secure, and that's maybe a sampling of some of the things.
That's great. We at Amazon, we have these leadership principles. We like to think big. We're customer obsessed. We've got some notions, and we've heard some notions from customers about what they think the impact of Gen AI is going to be, but what do you see? What are your thoughts about like the future of government and Gen AI?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe, there's an infinite number of directions, but my mind maybe immediately goes to 2. One is reinventing the provision of services, even very simple services, even just, a chatbot, here's some health information, here's some voting information, just making it possible for information to be found more easily by citizens, for them to have an easier experience interacting with government. I think that's good both in the just the mundane sense that citizens have a better day-to-day experience, and in a grand sense that I think it providing services well legitimizes democracy, and providing services poorly undermines democracy. I think nothing could be as important as that. I mean, I think the second is things that need to be done at very large scale, which again, it could range from anything like responding to large volume of FOIA requests to dealing with a large amount of clinical or lab information, or just analyzing just kind of large amounts of budget information. This idea that you used to have these tasks are repetitive, but they're not repetitive enough that previously you couldn't do them with that previously you needed a human, and so finding ways to do that at a larger scale And I think also there'll be equivalents of that on the classified side as well. So those are maybe two kind of general philosophical directions where I think there's just a huge amount of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I agree. Just the processing of information, could be records, could be a number of use cases. So government customers want to realize this future. I mean, the teams and I really sense momentum and interest. What do you think customers need to do to get started? And they're thinking about Claude 3 Sonnet and Claude 3 and Haiku. What do you think they need to do?
Yeah, so I mean, I would, just putting myself in, the position of a government employee or a procurement officer, I would very much think in terms of very simple pain points. I would repeat the point I made earlier, which is, can we find tasks that are repetitive, but not so repetitive that they could be automated before, right? Like, I have to fill out, all of these types of clinical information, or I have to do the same thing, but it's a little different. I have to look through this page of information and, and answer some question that's like straightforward, but simple word matching couldn't do it, right? Things that are just as simple as that. Things where you would have said 2 years ago, man, there's got to be some way to automate this, but I don't know quite what it is. Well, now for many of those, they're kind of things that were on the edge and you couldn't do. Many of them you can now do. So that would be kind of my philosophical picture of it. In terms of operationally, I think one of the reasons Anthropic thinks of itself as primarily an enterprise company, and that obviously includes public sector. But one of the reasons that we maintain a commercial product, a consumer product, is that it's very easy if you're making decisions for an enterprise. Just play around with the consumer product and feed it maybe not real data if it's sensitive, but the kind of data that you would that would help you to do your job better. And that's just kind of a very quick lightweight way of lightweight way of prototyping. In terms of these specific models, we generally think of our family of models, the Claude 3 family, and now Claude 3.5 Sonnet, as offering different trade-offs. If something needs to be done at very, very large scale, such that budget is an issue, and/or if it needs to go fast. For example, if you're serving citizens, residents of a particular constituency in some kind of publicly facing interface, then you want to go for something like 3 Haiku, which is very fast, can be deployed at scale, and is many times cheaper than some of the more powerful models, while still being pretty powerful for its class. If you're looking for something like more complicated data analysis, really kind of understanding, something that you'd have to think about, then something like 3.5 Sonnet or 3 Opus may be more appropriate. And as we described, when we announced 3.5 Sonnet, later this year there's likely going to be a 3.5 Haiku and a 3.5 Opus that will move out the frontier of what we can do. In terms of just some examples, things like, I've heard things like we struggle to handle all the FOIA requests we receive, takes us a lot of time to go through, documentation and look for PII, just budget breakdowns, like there's just too many things, how do I group them, how do I understand them, we're thinking of doing something, does it comply with the very large number of internal policies that it needs to comply with? These are in the realm of, gee, this really should be automatable, and now maybe finally it is.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about use cases, operationalizing things, experimenting, piloting, getting started, but I do want to spend a few minutes on the fundamentals around AI, and how do you think about safety and steerability in your models?
Yeah, so I think maybe this gives an opportunity to talk a little bit about Anthropic on the research side, right? This is a couple steps away removed from the model you immediately see, but it's helpful to describe a bit what goes into these models. How do we train them both that makes them powerful and that makes them safe? So a couple concepts. One concept is this idea of constitutional AI, which I think distinguishes Anthropic from some of the other companies. What that is we're able to give the model an explicit set of principles. For early constitutions, we use like UN Declaration of Human Rights, Apple's Terms of Service. But increasingly we're starting to think about, could we provide custom constitutions for a particular constituency or for, particular services or needing to provide given information. And so this allows us to more precisely steer what the model does. About a year ago this time, I was in DC, I testified in Congress, and the senators were very interested in, why does your model do what it does? Why does it answer certain questions, including politically sensitive ones, the way it does? And what is the policy towards child safety? And for all of those, I could just point at the Constitution and say, look, our models aren't perfect, they're inherently statistical, but this is the target, this is the thing we're trying to do. There's no kind of secret plan to make the model biased in some way that we'd prefer. It's all there. It's all on those few pages. So that's idea one. Idea two, which has been researched for a long time, but we've started to do early commercial work around it, is looking inside the models and understanding why they do what they do. These models have, something like hundreds of billions of parameters inside them, hundreds of millions of neurons inside them, which, believe it or not, is still much smaller than the human brain, but it's a lot. It's beyond the scale of our intellect to understand. And you might think it's hard to understand what's going on, or impossible to understand what's going on inside them, but we've made a lot of progress on doing so. And we publish that research every few months. And recently we put out an API that shows features inside the model that are human understandable. Things as complicated as a feature that corresponds to the idea of hedging, either literally or metaphorically. There are features that correspond to representing bias or lack of bias against various groups. And so the API allows you to turn these things up or down in order to study them and more precisely steer the model. This isn't available on AWS yet. We're still in the research phase. Again, a lot of this couple minutes is about the research phase. But in terms of what's coming down the pike, in terms of what we're able to do, and that already informs a lot of the training and the monitoring of our models, those are some things that we do. And I think beyond that, just at a very mundane level, trust and safety monitoring, we build filters to look across all the behavior of the model and understand patterns of bad behavior. We're very concerned about kind of coordinated attacks, state-level attacks by other kinds of actors. And so on top of the model safety, we do a lot of that.
That's great. So you've given us a good sense of safety and steerability and how you're dealing with that and managing it. What's your perspective on responsible AI?
Yeah, so I guess I would think about safety and steerability are kind of very technical concepts at the level of the model. I think of responsible AI as maybe being a little bit more about how do we apply our model in the world, right? What are the use cases? What is the broader purpose of applying the model? And so I wanted to give one example of this that's very recent and very topical. So we and AWS and Accenture recently worked with the DC Department of Health to power a chatbot that allows residents to ask natural language questions about things like nutrition services, vaccinations, schedules, other kind of just simple health information. It's available in both English and Spanish, probably will be available in other languages as well, and so does a lot to increase the accessibility of this very simple public service. DC has a goal to become the country's healthiest city, and we're working very hard to help them meet this goal. And of course, our usual standards and AWS's usual standards of privacy, appropriate behavior of the model, those are very important. But when I think about the purpose being provided here, right? This is I think on one level, again, providing things to citizens that it was more difficult or more frustrating for them to be provided before, including underserved people who may not have received these kinds of services or received them well in the past. And then I would point again to this broader point, which I think is just really important, which is that if we provide these services well it makes democracy as a whole more effective. And if we provide them poorly, it undermines the notion of democracy. And it's an open question which direction AI, in a macro sense, will take us. And I want it to take us in the direction of reinventing and revitalizing democracy, and not the very negative other alternative.
Yeah, that's great. I love this notion of things being well served, right, as a power for democracy. So we've talked about safety, we've talked about steerability and responsible AI, but I don't think we could have a discussion if we didn't bring up security. And so how are you ensuring that these transformational ideas and opportunities are secure?
Yeah, so security is one of these things that I mentioned as a reason for partnership with AWS. So you guys are, as you know better than I do, known for providing world-class security. Particularly on the customer side, right? We talked about IC Community Marketplace, secret and top secret clouds. So you at AWS have been doing that for a long time. So we are kind of able to benefit from your security for this new application. Someone who uses Claude through AWS doesn't have to rely on Anthropic security, right? I definitely don't take it personally, but something that may be going through the heads is how good is the security of this, this startup that's only existed for 3.5 years? I just imagine people are thinking that, and I don't take it personally at all, because I would ask the same question. But you look at AWS, and they've been doing this for a long time, including serving government customers. That said, it is also the case that actually Anthropic security is much, much better than you would expect for a company that's been around for 3.5 years. We have something called a responsible scaling policy that helps us to deal with AI models as they scale and become more powerful. And one of the key concepts in our responsible scaling policy is an increased level of security. We are very concerned about the algorithms and the trained models that were used being stolen, including by state actors. And so we've worked harder and harder to make sure that these models are secure. Anthropic is actually 8% of Anthropic works on security, because as far as we're concerned, we think of these models as national security assets.
That's great. So safety and security, we've walked through that. It's really central to your approach, even though you're 3.5 years old. I think those are legitimate questions, but I love the framework. So especially at this time when public sector customers are really just beginning their journey and they're thinking more about these citizen services and these experiences that they want to deliver, like the great example you gave on DC government. Tell us more about the work you're doing, like red teaming and policy vulnerability testing and things like that.
Yeah, so first of all, what is policy vulnerability testing? I mean, that's a concept people may not have heard of. Anthropic has an AUP, an acceptable use policy, which says you can use models for these things, but you can't use models for those things. So example of things that we currently don't allow, we don't allow electioneering or influence campaigns. We don't allow, obviously, models to be used for various, criminal or violent purposes. And on one hand, the great thing about AI models is that your AUP can be, in principle, self-enforcing. You can train your model to, if someone asks it, I don't know, I want to, convince voters of this false thing at scale, or I want to make a bioweapon. The model is able to recognize that and refuse it. But the science of training these models, even with all the techniques like constitutional AI and interpretability that I talked about, it's still an inexact science. And so there will always be a mismatch, some level of mismatch between what the AUP says and what the model actually allows. And so policy vulnerability testing basically tests Anthropic's models for that mismatch, finding places where the two don't match up, or where by interacting with the model in a certain way, you can adversarially get it to engage in behavior that it's not supposed to engage in. For those familiar with the security world, it's probably the AI version of pen testing or something like that. And so we conduct policy vulnerability testing on all of our models. Because 2024 is an election year, we have focused especially on policy vulnerability testing for electioneering and influence campaigns. But we've also done, again, a lot of things related to national security, use of models for malicious cyber attacks, for bioweapons, the general kind of CBRN thing. As I mentioned before, we've been working with the US and UK AI safety institutes to do pre-deployment testing. So the idea is before we release our model, we hand it over to these institutes and allow them to run various tests, which I think now are, for now are mainly national security tests, but we'll probably expand into a wide range of areas. There's no law that requires us to do that. It's very early in the process. We've just chosen to help them pioneer and kind of iterate on this.
Yeah.
And all of this, I should say, red teaming, policy vulnerability testing is primarily done by third parties, right? We want some kind of independent verification, just as you wouldn't do pen testing to attack your own system. You'd hire someone else to do it.
Sure. So building on all of that, building on policy vulnerability testing, on red teaming, responsible scaling, and just also keeping in mind the context of the ongoing regulatory environment, what in your point of view can public sector customers, what can they learn or what can they glean from customers' best practices they're doing commercially and internationally? What's your point of view there? What can they learn?
Yeah, maybe I can give a general perspective on kind of the regulatory environment and kind of how to think about it. So I think really the key to everything, I hope in the good world the key to everything is these AI safety institutes that I've talked about before. So let's focus on the one in the U.S., NIST. So currently, what this institute does is it doesn't have regulatory power. It can't say you have to do X. But it's developing a bunch of tests that can be run on models, again, either via pre-deployment testing or after the models are released on the market. And I think actually this ability to develop healthy and effective tests is going to be essential for the regulatory environment. If you think about these models, right, in a way they're like very opaque. I talk to the model, I try and get it to do something good, I try and get it to do something bad. Maybe if I phrased it a different way, it would have been more likely to do the bad thing, or maybe less likely to do the bad thing. We don't have a great understanding. If I kind of gave you two models and was like, which of these is safe, which of them is unsafe, which of them is maybe a threat to public safety, which isn't. I wouldn't have any way to answer that, right? It's kind of like we're in the era of airplanes, where you show me two blueprints, and the science of flying is really new, and I just don't know. I just can't know which one is better. And so the development of tests gets us to a world where it's actually possible to answer those questions. And if we can't answer those questions, if we don't have good tests, then almost a priori regulation is going to be totally useless. It's either a rubber stamp or it's kind of a hammer that slows everything down without any insight into what's actually bad and what's actually good. And if we get it right, then it enables precision, which I think is always the most important. I think especially that these AI safety institutes are also going to be essential to guidance on how to deploy these models in the federal government. What standards do they have to meet? And that's where I think it gets back to to value for customers as yourself. I think the standards that are going to be set by NIST are also going to echo in terms of state and local deployments. We kind of already have people who are thinking about state laws, refer to NIST. And so, I think these institutes are very important. And if I were someone deploying these models, I would think about what are these institutes already doing, or what could I talk to them and encourage them to do that's kind of relevant to my type of deployment, right? Let's not duplicate effort here. And then when you go out to deploy these models, we'll already have run the relevant tests because we already have relationships with these organizations. So that can really kind of streamline deployment and maybe ease your regulatory worries instead of creating more of them.
That's really helpful. Well, Dario, just thanks for joining us today. I know taking time out of your schedule and busy schedule and continuing to build a company. And thanks for the discussion and the partnership, and particularly around the new models. This was really exciting. I think I want to close with, because we care about public sector so much, like what's your point of view on the future of where this is going with public sector and how we can support it at AWS? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a future which we have to act in a certain way in order to achieve it, where deployment of these models is really revolutionary and and happens quickly, and the future is bright. So I think to repeat some of my points, this idea of provisioning the most basic services and the most basic analysis of information in government in the same way that it happens in the private sector, making it happen quickly, making it happen at scale, creating a world where where a lot of the things that were harder to do at scale can actually be done, and a citizen is able to access their government services more quickly, access information more quickly, and has a view of government from state to local to federal as efficient, effective, giving me the information immediately. I don't have to wait a huge amount of time for it. There's just this chatbot or this agent that provides me the information that I need quickly. And then in the other direction, I think on the world stage, I'm deeply concerned. Right? There's some concern. Some people have made the thesis that could AI be a technology of authoritarianism? Does it allow pervasive surveillance? Right? I don't know if it does or not, but I think what we can control is we can counter that by, as I've said several times, thinking about how AI can enhance democracy. Right? How can we bend it in a direction that's good? And everyone sitting here has a role in that.
That's fantastic. Effective, efficient government with an enhanced democracy. So I'll sign up for that for sure.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks, Dario.